Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the third and final webinar of GSA's Need to Know webinar series. I am Marie Bernard, Deputy Director of the National Institute on Aging, and I will be your moderator today. I'm pleased to be joined by 4 division leaders from NIA, who I will introduce in just a moment. But as a housekeeping note, this webinar will be recorded and shared at the conclusion of the session. GSA will also be live tweeting about the webinar, and we invite you to join using the hashtag NIA Outlook at Geron Society that you see in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. So feel free to tweet away. So I will introduce our panelists, starting off with each person answering the question, what about the field of aging excites you in the coming year? Let's start with John Haaga, Director of our Division of Behavioral and Social Research. John, what excites you?
Thanks. And first, I have to say I'm coming off a case of the flu, so I'm actually much more excited about everything than I probably sound. One of the big things, we've got a few of our program emphases that are really going to pay off this year. One is we're getting review on some applications that came in response to a request for applications on socioeconomic disparities in health at older ages. This was a one-time thing for a set-aside, but it's an enduring interest. We really want to understand why SES differentials have been growing and, if possible, do something about it. We're also looking for the first data from a big effort to collect nationally representative data on cognitive aging and dementia assessment, the harmonized cognitive assessment protocol. And that's going to be available for a subset of health and retirement study participants. Most of them have whole blood biomarkers and GWAS data. And it's going to be harmonized with data that are simultaneously being collected in Mexico, China, India, and England. So we really might be in a position to know a lot more about dementia trends and differences in the very near future. And lastly, we're doing a lot on Renewal this year. It's kind of inside baseball, but working on large data infrastructure projects, centers, and networks. So we hope to have a lot of announcements coming out this year.
Excellent. Lots of good things. Next up is Eliezer Masliah, Director of our Division of Neurosciences. Eliezer, what excites you?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today here and for joining us at the webinar. I'm the Director of the Division of Neuroscience, and in the field of aging, we're really excited by a number of new developments, particularly as it relates to the topic of resilience. We just recently had a summit on the aging and cognition, and the main topic that came about was the question of resilience, both from the context of genetic factors, the environment, the microbiome, imaging technology, and so on. So we're working pretty hard with our colleagues on the other divisions, generating opportunities, and we already have some opportunities out there as well on the field of aging and resilience that we invite you to submit applications and participate. Also, we're very excited as to the impact that the BRAIN Initiative is going to have on the field of aging. As you know, BRAIN Initiative has been funding technology for imaging the brain and analyzing the brain in new ways for the past few years. And now a lot of that technology have matured, and some really exciting new technologies have been developed, in particular technologies for single cell analysis. And for example, we have learned that instead of the traditional 5 or 6 neuronal cell types in the cortex that were described by Cajal, we probably have over 20 or more varieties of neurons. So trying to understand these and the consequences of aging on different types of brain cells is a very exciting area. Also, there have been quite a bit of improvement of the technology of imaging the brain, connectivity, synapses. In particular, there is a novel synapse ligand that recognizes the SV2 synaptic protein that appears very interesting in terms of, again, imaging synaptic activity and synaptic connectivity and what are the consequences of aging, cognition, behavior, etc. So resilience, novel imaging techniques, single cell, brain initiatives, these are areas that, again, are very exciting to us.
Excellent. Next, we have Winnie Rossi, who's the Deputy Director of the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. Winnie, what excites you?
Thanks, Marie, and thanks to everyone for the invitation for me to participate here. So in the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology, like Eliezer in the Division of Neuroscience, we're very excited about resilience, the ability to withstand or adapt to adverse conditions or stressors. For us, some examples include wound healing, recovery from a hip fracture, recovering good function, the ability to sustain physically demanding activities without too much fatigue, the ability to maintain balance after a fall or a slip, and the susceptibility to or recovery from infection. And all of this is aimed at reducing disability and disease and increasing functional independence in older age. And we're also very excited about our continuing efforts in studying multiple chronic conditions in older people. As we know, it's really rare that older people have only one disease or condition, but rather it's much more common that they have many. And the issues in studying multiple chronic conditions are quite complex. We focus on how those diseases interact with one another, how the drugs that are used to treat the different diseases interact with each other, and how the diseases and drugs interact all within the same person. So with the hope of better understanding all of these things, we hope that we can influence practice guidelines and help treat multiple problems in older people with as few drugs as possible effectively. And finally, something that is so critical for us, which is fostering career development in aging by increasing the engagement of early physician scientists from various medical and surgical specialties who aim to focus their careers on aging and geriatrics. And our ability over the past few years has been really good to begin attracting more junior researchers and physicians into understanding the special aspects of aging and geriatrics, and we're excited to continue that in the coming year.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Felipe Sierras, who's the Director of the Division of Aging Biology. Felipe, what excites you?
Well, thanks for including me in this discussion. What excites me actually is, the question would be, what doesn't excite me? The Division of Aging Biology is interested in the basic molecular and cellular events that occur during aging. And the goal we have is to prevent things from happening by understanding how they happen. One of the big things that we are focusing right now is actually the same that has been mentioned by Winnie and Eliezer, resilience. That's a very, very important concept that has been getting a lot of attention. From our perspective, what we're interested in is developing methods that how we can measure resilience in animal models, primarily mice, because we leave the humans to the GCG division. But the point is that we're trying to figure out how can we measure resilience and what measures of resilience are predictive of future health, which is something that would be very important for the field, and really it cannot be done easily in humans. So that's a major area that we're interested in. Another thing that has come very, very strong recently, and that we're very excited, is the field of senolytics. More generally, the different ways in which we're finding that we can extend health span and lifespan. The interventions testing program has developed several compounds. Many of you might have heard about rapamycin, alpha-estradiol, and others like that, which came from the ITP. Senolytics did not come from the ITP, came from research-initiated activities, and finding out that senescent cells exist everywhere, and removing them does help your health. This is a very exciting thing right now. Another area that we're very interested, and we happen to be interested at the same time that the Nobel Prize Committee is interested, is circadian rhythm. One thing that we're finding is that one of the oldest methods that we have to manipulate lifespan is diet. And we find that when you eat is almost as important as what you eat or how much you eat. The role of the circadian rhythm on how we improve or decrease our health span is something that excites us very much.
Thank you. As you can hear, that there's quite a bit of overlap and interest among the divisions, and we'll dive into that a bit more in a couple of minutes. But I'd like to thank you all for being with us today, and also virtually introduce two other key leaders for NIA. Robin Barr, who's the Director of the Division of Extramural Activities, and Carl Hill, who's the Director of our Office of Special Populations. Robin and Carl will be continuing with the conversation online via GSA Connect. They've already gotten started with that. And I encourage you to check that out and see the discussion thread if you've not already done so. So in terms of thinking about how the divisions interact, the interdisciplinary, interdivisional perspective, I'm going to ask some questions that will focus on functions that are important to one division, but finding out how it applies to others. And please use the toolbar, the question functionality toolbar, to submit questions for our panel. So the first question is going to revolve around geroscience. Geroscience addresses the theory that aging underlies the development of all chronic illnesses, and using analytics, as Felipe mentioned, may help with that. So you might think that this is exclusively the focus of aging biologists, but I'm going to ask Eliezer, Winnie, and John to talk about how geroscience impacts their science area. So let's start with Eliezer.
Yeah, well, our division focuses primarily on brain aging and Alzheimer's disease, and of course the pillars of geroscience as described by Felipe and his group, that include epigenetics, stem cells, inflammation, proteostasis, etc. They have an incredible impact in understanding the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease and the aging of the brain. One area that we've been focusing in particular is proteostasis. Of course, proteostasis have a great impact in the accumulation of proteins that are neurotoxic, that are involved in Alzheimer's disease, like A-beta, tau, alpha-synuclein, and so on. But what I think is the most interesting, and this has come about through the collaboration with Felipe and the Division of Aging Biology, is asking the question how changes in the periphery, how systemic changes in the pillars of geroscience, again, like proteostasis, inflammation, stem cells, epigenetic, etc., have an impact in the brain. I mean, we often tend to think that what happens in the brain, or whatever happens in the brain, is coming from the brain. But the reality is that probably there is a lot of peripheral pathologies, including demodulation on autophagy or mitochondria or epigenetics, that might have serious consequences in terms of the brain and the development of neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease. So this is an area in which we're particularly collaborating with Felipe and others. Also along these lines, and of great interest in terms of environment is the interaction of the microbiome and the gut microbiome with the central nervous system, again, in the context of Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disorders, but also aging of the brain. So these are some examples of interactions. Thank you.
Thank you. So Winnie, how about from the geriatrics and clinical gerontology perspective?
From our perspective, it's about bringing findings from basic mechanistic studies into clinical practice and understanding the mechanisms of aging changes that underlie multiple health and functional outcomes will help us develop better, more effective interventions for diseases and functional problems in people. And our goal is to find ways to get basic science findings translated into clinical practice as quickly as we can. And progress in doing that and in developing and using effective interventions against adverse aging changes can be aided by increasing interactions between lab animal studies and human studies in order to best take advantage of the ability to screen and assess candidate drugs or interventions in animal studies and human studies. And so DGCG and DAB have been collaborating on ways to promote research that will lead to the development of a panel of mechanistic predictive markers of aging. So a panel of markers that affect multiple aging outcomes. And these could be used to screen and assess the effects of candidate interventions for multiple health outcomes. And for DGCG, this is important because we conduct clinical trials, often of single interventions that affect several aging-related outcomes, and getting the two areas of basic and clinical collaborating together can move this process forward and help us to develop more of those trials. One example of a trial that we've already conducted is the ASPRI trial, the aspirin in reducing events in the elderly. And the primary objective of that trial was to establish whether or not a single drug, aspirin, can prolong life, or a life free of dementia, or life free of significant persistent physical disability in healthy elderly.
Excellent. So John, is there any applicability to behavioral and social research of this geroscience concept?
Yeah, I think of two of the things that we're doing as being quite relevant in areas where there's a lot of communication. One that I wanted to mention is this reversibility network. Its formal name is the Interdisciplinary Research Network on Early Adversity and Later Life Reversibility. But if you Google Reversibility Research Network, it takes you to the spot on the UCLA website where the meetings and some pilot studies that are going on are listed. It's really quite exciting. We've known for a long time that adverse conditions in very early life, including prenatal, can have serious consequences for health in adult life and old age. But we're learning more about the mechanisms that transduce disadvantage and environmental insults to later in the lifespan, and looking to turn that understanding into new research targeted on specific mechanisms, and looking for crucial periods for intervention and types of intervention to mitigate these long-range harms. The things they're concentrating on in the first set of pilots were measurement issues, identifying pathways, and potential interventions. But it should lead to more announcements in the future, and I urge anyone interested to look there. And the second area is I'm a sort of a demographer, and we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of the sort of formalization of the Gompertz curve of mortality, and it's still a mystery at the heart of demography of aging. After a low point around puberty, the hazard rate of mortality rises with age in a way that's quite linear if you graph it, if you draw it on logarithm paper. The mortality rates, the level of mortality has come down quite a lot since 1900. The average, the risk of death is just about a quarter what it was for 60-year-olds in 1900 for 60-year-olds now. But the slope hasn't changed at all. It's still slightly more than doubling the mortality rate with each decade of life. So a 70-year-old is more than twice as likely to die as a 60-year-old, and an 80-year-old more than twice as likely to die as a 70-year-old. So we haven't made progress on the slope. We've only changed the intercept. And that's something which we have a group at the National Academy of Sciences working on the future of demography of aging, and I think it'll be quite a good deal informed by what's being done in Geroscience.
Excellent. So being sensitive to the fact that we have 3 other areas we're going to try to have comments on, Felipe, do you have additional comments in less than 1 minute?
Less than 1 minute. Just want to mention that Geroscience is not all of DAB, and DAB is not all Geroscience. Geroscience actually has been embraced very heavily by the community, and has been embraced by several other institutes at NIH as well. Basically, it is a thing coming from basic biology with an expansion towards clinical view, but it's really focused on what basic biology can add to the system. Again, focusing in health and well-being rather than treatment of diseases.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to another area that would seem to belong to a particular division, and that's the science of behavior change. That would seem, to belong to the Division of Behavioral and Social Research led by John Haaga. But I'm going to ask for Winnie, then Felipe, and then Eliezer to talk about how this impacts and how you've interacted over this issue of the science of behavior change. So Winnie, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, for DGCG, we conduct studies and trials in 2 areas that involve behavioral change, and they're big ones. They're physical activity and diet and nutrition. These are areas that we've discovered through science that we know that individuals can be perfectly in control of physical activity and their diets and their choices that they make. And so in the clinical program, we can work on studying and identifying what might the most sound behavioral changes be to help people keep in good shape, keep mobile, and keep a healthy weight and keep good nutrition. And where BSR comes into that is they are the ones who get people to make those changes. It's their scientists who work on behavior change that can help carry out what we've discovered in physical activity and in diet to help actually be trained and understand well and make the change, which is probably the hardest part of the whole thing.
Excellent. Felipe, any thoughts from the basic biology viewpoint?
Yeah, again, I think I'm very excited about the way in which the science of behavior thing is developing, because one of the things that they're trying to do is actually to understand how these behaviors get under your skin. In other words, it's well and good to know that physical activity and diet affect your health. We know that. How exactly? How does it happen molecular? How does it happen at the very basic level, so that we can develop things that will help the elderly to take care of these things. So in terms of physical activity, for example, the Common Fund of the NIH has developed this project called MotorPack, which is precisely that, trying to figure out how does the physical activity translate into molecular events. And in that sense, we are collaborating in MotorPack, and the GCG is also collaborating, and I think it's a very interesting thing going on. In terms of the diet, which again is the other major behavioral thing that we have, the thing is there's very little we can do to change the behavior of people in terms of diet. BSR does a heroic effort in doing that, but it's very difficult. So in that sense, our effort, for example, with the diet and circadian rhythm that I mentioned earlier, I think will be important in that sense.
Very good. Eliezer, from the Division of Neuroscience perspective.
Yeah, along the same lines of what Felipe and Winnie described, also our interactions with BSR and in terms of behavior is primarily on exercise and nutrition, but the angle for us is cognition. So the area of behavior that we're interested on, or we're looking into, what are the consequences of exercise and nutrition and so on, is the impact on cognition. And in fact, I mean, in the last couple of years, we have funded together with BSR a number of applications, for example, investigating gains in neurocognition in a trial intervention with exercise. We also have another study looking at age-related cognitive decline and what is the effect of using mindfulness-based techniques that reduce stress, and what are, again, the consequences of cognitive decline. And again, finally, also we have funded studies where combining exercise, mindfulness, and other techniques, again, what are the consequences on cognition, and if they can prevent, enhance, or reverse cognitive decline. And again, this is work that has been done in collaboration with BSR. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so John, again, a minute or less, additional comments?
I agree with everybody, and my job is to point people to websites. I urge, there's a Common Fund program with that name, the Science of Behavior Change. It's about basic research in initiation, personalization, and maintenance of behavior change. Maintenance is crucial. It's got an experimental medicine approach of identifying targets and testing the degree to which targets are engaged, and that then produces desired behavior change. They recently had a meeting with a summary publication, which is up there, which has the excellent name Breaking Bad Habits. So I do encourage people to have a look at that website if they're interested in this field.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to another topic that's gotten quite a bit of focus lately. We got a big increase in our budget in FY16, another one in FY17. And, you know, depending upon what happens in Congress for this fiscal year, we may get another $400 million increase in our budget for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias research. There's this urban myth that the only people who can be funded in Alzheimer's disease and related research are neuroscientists. And thus, we're going to again ask the representatives from the other divisions than the Division of Neuroscience to address what they have in research that overlaps with this or is essential to this. And we'll start with Felipe, then do John, and then Winnie. So Felipe, what do you have to say about that urban myth?
I think it's a half true, half wrong myth. There is the applicants are scared to apply, and that is part of the myth. The ones who have applied have done reasonably well, but still it does require a special review in order to get that, and that's something that the NIA has been working on, how to get these other people involved into Alzheimer's disease. Basically, we have this increase in funds. We want to use them as sagely as possible, and one of the things we want to do is to bring in people with different expertises, not necessarily neurobiology, but who can provide. And Eliezer mentioned earlier about the importance, for example, proteostasis and other aspects of geroscience and aging biology. And I think that's an important thing, that we're trying to develop those things. In fact, Alzheimer's gives us a unique opportunity to test the geroscience hypothesis. So geroscience hypothesis says that aging is a major risk factor. Well, let's test that using Alzheimer's as a model. And I think that that would be very productive both for the Alzheimer's field and for the geroscience field. There's also other things that we're doing, trying to find out how anti-aging interventions, that people don't like the term anti-aging, but how interventions that delay the process of aging can affect Alzheimer's. And as I said, one of them is through these things on Neuroscience and AD, but we also have things on SBIRs and other things, so as to get also some small companies to jump into the field and see what they can provide. How can they help in our goal of addressing Alzheimer's when their background is on basic biology? So there's a lot of things that we're doing in parallel or in conjunction with the Division of Neuroscience in terms of trying to address this issue of how does the aging of the biology of aging affects Alzheimer's.
And if you haven't seen it, those in the audience, Dr. Sierra did a very nice blog addressing this issue of basic biologists and research related to Alzheimer's disease. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. I guess the next on the list would be John Haaga to talk about how the Division of Behavioral and Social Research is involved with Alzheimer's related research.
Thanks. Well, it's been a big task for us, probably a larger challenge in getting on top of the fields than some of our other colleagues. But our major concerns are dementia care, epidemiology of dementia, and prevention, particularly non-pharmacological prevention. And in actually each of those three areas, we have shared responsibilities with people in other divisions. I would encourage all GSA members not to worry too much about which division is doing what. We do talk to each other. We're all on the same floor of an office building, and we walk past each other all the time. So contact any of us to discuss things, and we'll refer you. Dementia care, I want to particularly emphasize. I think we've all agreed we have, even with the great progress in the science, we're going to have millions of people in this country and millions more worldwide with this devastating disease, coping with it for decades to come. And our current system for caring for them is very haphazard, huge disparities, probably quite wasteful, and we really want to understand more what is happening and also ways to improve it. We also very much want to support the unpaid family caregivers. That's an area where we feel we've had some strong research in the past, but the non-system for caring for people with dementia, especially outside nursing homes, is something we're very interested in developing and promoting ways to do better.
Thank you. And then Winnie, I'm a geriatrician, and oftentimes there's kind of a separation between geriatrics and clinical gerontology and neuroscience. So what is the viewpoint of the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology in terms of a role for Alzheimer's research?
Well, I think in this past year, in 2017, we had a really tremendous opportunity to collaborate across all of the divisions on Alzheimer's disease-related initiatives. And GCG was involved in at least 5 of those. Working with DAB, DN, and DVSR. The topics included things like the relationship between delirium and Alzheimer's disease, also tools for clinical care and management of Alzheimer's disease and its related multiple morbidities. We had another joint initiative with DN and DAB on understanding the effects of certain genes on the interaction of Alzheimer's disease and longevity. And with BSR, we worked on an initiative on developing socially assisted robots to engage persons with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers. And also, finally, we worked on an initiative on dynamic interactions between peripheral systems and the brain in aging and Alzheimer's disease. So I think the very generous and our good fortune to have this increase in our funds at NIA for Alzheimer's disease has really given us the opportunity to really put together some really great trans NIA initiatives.
Very nice. So, Eliezer, as with your colleagues, could you, in a minute or less, give some additional thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. Just want to say, feel free to contact us if you have any questions about any of the funding opportunities that my colleagues spoke about. And also, I just want to remind everybody that we have our Alzheimer's Disease Research Summit happening here in Bethesda, March 1st and 2nd, 2018. And again, participation of web would be also available, but everybody is welcome to come and to provide feedback. And also, hopefully, we could provide to the attendees of the webinar our link to the Alzheimer FOAs, but just basically, it's very simple. It's www.nih.gov/ADFOAs. And you can find all these opportunities that my colleagues were talking about. And again, we're happy to talk to you about it.
Okay, thank you, Eliezer. So coming to our final content area, geriatrics and clinical gerontology. Winnie is the expert, but again, we're going to ask people from outside of the division to talk about content that overlaps and interactions. So we'll start with John with BSR, then Eliezer, and then Felipe. So John, what thoughts do you have?
Well, thanks. We work quite a lot with colleagues in GCG on issues involving trajectories of care, including end-of-life care. And on service systems, our role is not so much the content of care in particular episodes, but how are systems working or not working for old people. We funded work by the Dartmouth Atlas and others. The issue is that ostensibly similar patients get onto very different trajectories of care, meaning acute, rehab, long-term supports and services. And the question is, what difference does it make to them? We don't have an obsession with one measure or one event the way much of the health policy and services research has, an event like hospital readmission or nursing home admissions. But we really want to look at trajectories of care and why they differ and what difference it makes. We do share the concern with multimorbidity. The slogan here is taken from Shakespeare: when sorrows come, they come not as single spies, but in battalions. And that's the distinctive issue in our institute is that it's typically not one complaint, but many that people have, and how that gets handled in the system with its excessive reliance on specialists is of real concern.
Thank you, John. Eliezer, what thoughts do you have?
Well, yeah, we collaborate on a number of topics, going from clinical trials to, again, consequence of systemic disease on the central nervous system. Winnie mentioned before, for example, the aspirin trial, and in particular, we are interested on what are the consequences on cognition of such a trial. There are a number of other trials that are being conducted that, again, we would be interested on understanding better what are the cognitive consequences. Also, along the idea of systemic disorders that GCG is interested, that again, we want to look at CNS consequences are, for example, fractures and osteoporosis. We know that these could cause inflammatory processes that could in turn affect the microglia and nervous system and trigger conditions such as delirium. And again, along the lines of what Winnie was mentioning, we had this joint FOA on delirium and dementia, and we've been funding these sort of applications. So I think, again, there are a number of areas that intersect that are also relevant to the other divisions. As you mentioned, we really work as a team in this respect.
Very good. Felipe, you deal with the other animal systems. How do you interact with GCG?
Well, we don't only deal with animals, we do human studies as well, but what we do not do is clinical trials. And the part of the goal of basic research is to increase the knowledge that contributes to better success of these clinical trials. So basically, passing the baton, if you wish, from us to GCG is one way in which we interact. In fact, we have a lot of interactions with GCG. We work together quite well. Even Hadley is an active participant in the Neuroscience initiative, but also when we put out RFAs, we often find that GCG becomes interested in what we're talking about. So we came up with the concepts of resilience, the concept of genetic factors and things like that, and we have collaborated with GCG on those. There's also things that are collaborating with GCG as well as others, such as I also already mentioned the Motor Pact initiative of the Common Fund to try to figure out how does exercise get under your skin. There's also things like on immune function and reduced vaccine efficacy and things like that, where we work with NIAID as well as with GCG to develop things, basically, as I say, to bridge the gap between what we find in basic science and what that knowledge can provide to facilitate a successful clinical trial and application eventually into humans.
Thank you very much, and thanks to you all. At this point, I'd like to take some questions from our attendees. Kelsey, could you share our first question?
Absolutely. So our first question is about the field, research in the field of elder abuse and financial exploitation of older adults, more specifically with cognitive impairment. The question is, where does that fit in terms of research within the NIA? And this attendee in particular was thinking about how it affects caregivers and family. If we could talk a little bit about where that might fit within the division.
John, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yes, that's an interest. Marie was one of the leaders, and our division contributed to a NIH-wide workshop on elder abuse that included several presentations and discussions of financial abuse after the White House Conference on Aging in the summer of 2015, and we've had we've had research and funded it. We actually have had several meetings going back about 20 years at the National Academies of Science. There's our interest is, our role is as the research funders. There's other government agencies that are also interested, particularly on the financial side, and there's been a interagency working group on financial literacy. But we have several ideas. If you sort of watch we are very interested. Would love to get drafts of specific aims pages, and I'd be happy to then route them to a program officer who would know about the particular fields. And we also hope to have more initiatives coming in the not distant future.
Thank you, John. That raises a question that often gets asked of me. What happens if a researcher has an interest that doesn't really quite fit in any particular division? It kind of straddles divisions. How do you handle that?
Actually, everybody can reply on that. I always encourage people not to do phone calls because the sort of complex interdisciplinary nature of interesting research and also our kind of decentralized organization means that very often the first person you talk to probably isn't the one who knows the review committees in your field and can give you the best warning and knows which other institutes are interested. So I always encourage people to just do the draft of that specific aims page, which every application is going to require, not the part about how your institution is and your own suitability and the rest, all of which you need for the application, but specifically that one page saying exactly what you want to do. And then if you send it as an email attachment, we share it. And very often 2 or 3 of us will consult about something and then kind of converge on good advice. But my real thing is that people don't really need to worry about that. We're not hoarding here. We all have our straws in the same drink. So talking to us about just sending the specific aims page to the person you think probably, or the division you think probably is most relevant, we'll discuss it among ourselves, and the right person will respond. Some of them quicker than others.
This is Winnie from this is Winnie from GCG. I just wanted to follow up and reinforce what John said. Oftentimes when we get cold telephone calls, we're not always prepared to answer questions on the spot, and we might not be the right person to necessarily give you a good answer. And so we encourage email, not because we don't want to talk to you, but because we want to give the best possible answer in the most efficient way. And so I agree that the best way to do that is when we receive emails that have your ideas articulated as clearly as possible. And then, as John said, we do talk amongst each other a lot. We, across divisions, we do understand what's going on in each other's portfolios. And sometimes it also takes more than one person to, at NIA, to provide some input. And so if we get your ideas, it's best to let us work through on our own, and then we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that basically you can email any of us. It doesn't matter what field of interest or what have you. Just if you email any of us, we'll know how to reroute things to the appropriate person.
Kelsey, any other questions?
Yes, we had another question come in about specifically to Dr. Rossi, but perhaps each could discuss the expanding on the research of socially assistive robots in dementia care.
Yes, so we did. We actually did an FOA on that, and I unfortunately do not have that in front of me. So, and that was, I mean, John, you might know the FOA number offhand. This was a collaborative FOA between DVCG and DBSR.
I don't.
Yeah, I don't know, John.
The only
Yeah, I don't either, but we
is
can.
my Social Security number. But...
So actually, what we can do is possibly give you a link to that FOA, which would detail sort of all about the highlights and objectives that we'd be looking for in applications. Would that be okay, Kelsey?
That would be great. I will go ahead and post that on GSA Connect after the webinar for everyone to follow up on, so not to worry.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have another question from the audience about NIA's plans to understand the association between growing older with a disability and the early development of dementia, as well as how the different disabilities manifest in the spectrum of Alzheimer's disease development. And that is an open question for anyone to tackle.
Well, yeah, I guess it all depends, right, on the disability. Of course, for example, patients with conditions like trisomy 21, Down syndrome, are at very high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and that's an area in particular that we're interested in, particularly developing, for example, biomarkers and other measurements that would predict outcome in those individuals. But that is a very specific niche area, the one on Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. I mean, there might be others on disabilities and dementia. I don't know if the other, my colleagues have any other comments.
There is one way that we keep in touch with communities working on persons with disabilities, aging with disabilities, and that's through a unit at a forum at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine called the Forum on Aging, Disability, and Independence, and we've participated in recent years in many of the meetings. So besides actual initiatives that have been issued, we also have a chance to hear and get input from those communities.
Thank you very much. I had another question about ethnocultural minority older adults. And this question is specifically around caregiving in mid to late life for immigrant families. And this attendee would like to know if there's any research at NIA going on about addressing the needs of this vulnerable group.
I'll answer. Not enough. A AAAS fellow who's working with us this year, I've asked her to look carefully, to do a review of the last few years and to show what we have across a whole range on aging immigrant populations and ethnocultural minorities, as said there. So there is some. Most of the caregiver research that we've funded has had at least some attention to disparities and to differences among populations living in the United States, but I think it's an area that isn't all that well developed.
Other questions?
There was a question about the awareness around the Butler-Williams Scholar Program. However, are there opportunities or summer programs for early career investigators and postdocs who are interested in gaining more in-depth knowledge in aging research in any of the divisions?
Yes, well, in DGCG we have the GEMSTAR initiative, which I can also send out a link to, that works on junior physician investigators from various medical specialties in engaging them into working on aging and geriatrics research and integrating that into their careers.
Each of the divisions manages fellowship grants to individuals, training grants to institutions, and career development awards. And anybody interested, so that's right across the range of our science. I'd encourage anyone interested both to contact a kind of relevant subject matter person or division, but also to look at the DEA, the Division of Extramural Activities page on that. I don't know, is Robin on?
Robin and Carl are responding through GSA Connect.
Oh, okay, good. Well, Robin is the training officer for the institute and is the person who we consult on those particular mechanisms. But yeah, we all do it. It's an important part of what we're doing.
I would also like to add about the Division of Aging Biology has a summer training course on aging, which is a 1 week very intensive course, which is actually an R13. It's a grant. It's not organized by us, but we always participate. It's a whole week, and it rotates between 3 places: California, Washington, and Oklahoma. So it's a week seminar to learn about the basic biology of aging. It's a very intensive, very, very well received by the attendees always.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question, then I'd like to end on this one before we wrap up, Dr. Bernard. This one is more specific towards a recent NIA blog. And to our attendees, if you have not visited, the NIA has its own blog that posts regularly on a variety of topics covered today and not covered today. So I encourage everyone to look at that website. This was a recent topic on the blog, and there was a question about, given the recent natural disasters in 2017, how is aging research looking to better understand how these disasters may affect aging? And I think this might be a great question for a multidisciplinary look. So I invite anyone to answer.
Well, I'll go first. Amelia Carricker in our division is now managing a portfolio in social and behavioral research on the elderly and disasters. I used to be the program officer back when I did real work, but the blog points you to three. That post points to three interesting results from studies that we funded over the years. We first issued a special announcement shortly after Katrina. We re-upped that, we reissued that, and it funded interesting research about Hurricane Sandy, about the tsunamis in Japan and Indonesia. It's really quite a interesting and active field. We're no longer issuing separate FOAs, but largely because we feel it's now established and people know we're interested, and we've been getting some good applications. But I'd encourage someone interested in doing behavioral or social science research on that topic to get in touch with Amelia.
Any thoughts from the other divisions? Well, while I'm sorry, go ahead, Winnie. No, go ahead, Winnie.
No, this is Eliezer. I was going to mention that also with the natural disaster, there is changes in the environment, for example, in the water levels of certain toxins or in the air. And we in particular have been interested on funding research as to what are the impact of environmental changes associated with different conditions on cognition, and this is an area that we would like to continue to see growing. I mean, for example, the link with levels of heavy metals in the water and so on that could be related to natural disasters.
Okay, well, I see that we're down to just 2 minutes, and we've really covered a lot of information. Really thankful to all of you who've joined us on this webinar. Thank you, John, Eliezer, Winnie, Felipe. It's hard to get all of our leaders together at one time, and particular thanks to Carl and Robin as well, who've been engaging through GSA Connect for the last many weeks and will continue to be engaged. As a reminder, the webinar is recorded and will be shared via email and on GSA Connect later this week. And to keep the conversation going, those questions that we weren't able to get to will be answered over the next several days on GSA Connect. So I encourage you to take a look at that and keep the conversation going. So thank you to everyone, in particular Kelsey, who made this a very easy experience for us. And we look forward to reading the discussion on GSA Connect.